Welcome back. I'm back and I have a few more thoughts that I wrote down, jotted down. Eventually, I might like to just take all of the different information and just do a whole wrap up. I was thinking that it's possible that Shanann Watts, I'm going to come closer to the camera because I can't speak too loud here, but it is possible that Shanann Watts may have had a life-changing experience. I'm just trying to put together. Some people wonder how it is that the two of them ever got together, seeming to be different people. Sometimes also opposites do attract, but she was married to a man who studied to become a lawyer. And once he became a lawyer, he was the one to put the motion to divorce her. The only reason he gave was that Shanann was never home. She also was, I believe, a CEO of sorts or some kind of high-ranking person for a company before that or around that time. And she also was said to have had a bigger and better house than the home that she got to have with Chris before she was with him. So being a high-ranking person in some kind of a company, I'm not putting down people who have money, but sometimes when you're in that type of circle, sometimes the relationships you have in terms of the working relationships and so forth may not be very deep. I'm just putting that out, that it's possible that then when she became ill and she couldn't participate in a lot of the get-togethers or things that people did, she said that it sounds like almost her friends abandoned her. And that's when comes Chris as this knight in shining armor, where he let her sleep on his lap for 4 hours and he didn't get up to go potty. So he seemed like a very, very nice person. I keep thinking that, like I said, he didn't have relationships during any girlfriends while he was in high school, fitting somewhat a little bit of that not connecting with other people type that fits in a little bit with psychopaths. And psychopaths will mimic and will pretend to be the nicest people on earth to lure their victims. That was clear with Ted Bundy and other people that have, gained people's trust by being super nice. My take was sometimes that if people don't want other people to be onto them, they might swing to the very extreme of who they are, just to really make sure that nobody ever suspect or they're not on their track for who they really are. So I'm just speculating that perhaps Chris Watts was the super nice man that helped everybody. And you hear it even after the interview in prison, everything was out of consideration for other people. He pleaded guilty out of consideration for others, not to drag this on. He everything he's done is ever always been because he's such a nice guy. And I'm going to get more on that. So anyway, I'm also wondering, did Shanann Watts leave North Carolina to get away from her mother? Some people are saying that. But we can see that she did have a relationship with her mother, and it seemed like a somewhat tighter relationship or more connecting relationship than Chris had with his mother. They were in contact. Apparently they were in touch regularly by phone or otherwise, FaceTime. They regularly touched base and talked to each other. She had a heirloom, which is a recipe book with handwriting recipes from her mother and her grandmother, and she did say that her mother taught her how to cook. So there was a relationship that looks like Shanann had with her own mother. Chris did explain that her Sandy is a little bit similar type as Shanann in terms of taking control and so forth. And you notice it a little bit more on the interview. It happens to be that Sandy was sitting in the middle between the Frankie and her husband, but a lot of the time you can see that she is answering the questions and she's taking the lead on the interviews with Dr. Phil, more so than her husband. And so it's possibly that Shanann was a lot like her mother, and there's nothing wrong with that, with being an alpha female. And women that become CEOs of a company, Sandy she said that she was a certified aide or hairstylist. I'm not so sure all of those, but Shanann apparently has taken the lead on roles often, including her own home and what she was doing with Lavelle, also trying to get really high up on that. So anyway, she had, when she was diagnosed, she lost friends who could not understand about her illness. Lupus is not a psychosomatic disease, and a lot of disorders are not psychosomatic. There are physical evidence of the problems that people have. Lupus can be extremely painful and debilitating. If she had lupus, which it had to have been diagnosed by physicians, and they told her, she said that they told her that her pregnancies would be high risk. She had to have had real symptoms and real manifestations of the disease. It affects the organs, and there's a lot of other tests that can be done to diagnose with lupus. So this whole nonsense that she was hypochondriac, I mean, this woman, after she had been murdered, killed in her early years, 30s, young, she has been debased and defamed and accused of everything on the internet that I have seen. I know that my first video I was paying attention to a lot of things Shanann did in terms of how she related to Chris, but I was wondering, and I wrote a note about this, if she may have known in her heart of hearts that there was something different about Chris. Maybe he was odd at pleasing. She may have known that there was something unusual and couldn't put it in better words. So anyway, the way, the Chris probably might not have seemed like connecting. She said, he does what I tell him. And maybe she was saying that because that was the case, not because she was a mean woman. And when I first pointed out to these things, I also said very clearly, these might have been the dynamics that were happening. It could be that people sometimes also are starting to have trouble with these passive-aggressive behaviors. Someone who is given very specific instructions of how to cook a roast, and the husband takes both roasts, and it's very obvious that it's a lot of food, and yet she is very dumbfounded, asking her family. Of course, she made it public, but she may have noticed that he didn't care about these things. So you're not hurting anybody's feelings when their feelings are not heard. And so she is like dumbfounded, but I explained to him this, and I explained that. And I keep thinking that maybe these could be possibly some kind of passive-aggressive behaviors. You don't want to cook, you do it wrong, then you don't get asked again to cook again. And you go, oops, I did it wrong. And if you act innocent enough, then people come to your defense. And the other person who's having all these frustrations is the one that looks like the bad guy. That's called, it's not triangulating, but it's also a little bit of crazy making. You do things to make someone angry enough, and then the other person loses it. And Shanann doesn't look like she's losing it in on any of these videos. She's just simply expressing certain things that baffle the mind. But the crazy making is when people do things to make another person lose it, and then the other person's the one that looks crazy and mad. It's very, very interesting how these things happen. And the triangulating is when a person, I'm explaining certain terms, but a person may go to another person and say, this person's so bad with me, blah, blah, blah. It's their perspective or their take on situations, so forth. I'm not saying that Chris Watts these things, but so that you're aware about these tactics that are conscious or subconscious, or people know what when they're doing them. And they turn a third party against that person. So instead of addressing things directly with that person, they turn a third party, and it's called triangulation because then there is a villain, a victim, and a rescuer. The other person takes side with the person that's talking to them. And it is happening a little bit with Chris Watts because indirectly he keeps saying these things about Shanann Watts or this Blonder Media or whatever other people. I don't know if Cindy is behind all these videos. There's all these blackening or darkening or putting Shanann Watts on a dark light, and then there's people coming to the rescue of guess who? Chris Watts. So there is a little bit of triangulation happening at some levels from some part. What's really interesting is that Chris Watts is the murderer. He actually committed these murders against little girls, 3 and 4 years old. And he has to take responsibility. And the people who don't want to give him that responsibility, well, they better check with themselves and see what's going on. Because a father who kills their own children, under the circumstances of all the circumstances of what we know, to make excuses and say, well, it was these little patches that you put on the skin, how much can that deliver? I know with some medications you can get a lot delivered intradermally or transdermally, but this is not speed, and it's not, I don't believe there's that much in these patches as much as saying amphetamines, or what are they called, the drugs that cause people to go really, really crazy. He may have been sleep deprived. I have been sleep deprived before. It has never caused me to for a long period of time. That has happened to me, and it can cause disorientation. It can cause certain things, maybe a certain light level of psychosis, not full blown. But I don't believe that causes all of these different rationalizations. I think that at one point we'll stop. Hopefully, we'll see. We've seen through history how things perpetuate, and sometimes never getting the whole clarity of things. I'm not debating all of these points that people want to make about him not having a reason to have done what he did. So anyway, I was very clear that whatever Shanann's behaviors may have been were not the cause of her demise. They do not justify in any way. I may not like certain people. I may have issues with certain people. That's not going to cause me to kill them. And I also try to explain that it could be a possibly, even in the first video I said, maybe certain things could be founded. People might eventually develop certain animosity. And I didn't mean necessarily animosity when you're in marriages. Marriages are very complicated. What I was stating also, and I wasn't meaning to make this video about trying to explain or justify my previous video. I have no issues with people disagreeing with them. Was that the way to go? I explained that I had a friend of mine that was very bossy, and this friend of mine is a person that's very OCD. If you go to her house, all the labels, everything, you open a cabinet, all the labels are facing you. That's how neat she is. sounded like Shanann might have been that much OCD too. It was said that she was OCD. These are people that need control. They're not evil people. They're just people that like things a certain way, in a certain order, certain ways, and they're still nice people. So she was a little bossy with her husband and used to ask him, honey, go fetch my purse. And he would go like, he didn't like being asked to do these things. Well, eventually they worked it out. They went to counseling and they talked it out. I'm not saying that everybody has these skills. He wanted to leave. Those are the things you do. You don't kill your spouse because they ask you to go get a purse or because they said on video that you buy farting toys. There's more happening than all of that, and people know it. So it seemed to me that she loved her husband. She was very confused at the end. He never was forthcoming, never told her the truth about him having an affair, never told her, well, I found someone else. I'm tired of playing daddy and playing husband. And there's all that immaturity about all that time that he was alone. I also have questions about why exactly and precisely. There is an explanation why Shanann took those 5 or 6 weeks to go to North Carolina. Well, they were planning to sell their house. They were over their heads with debt, and they had already filed for bankruptcy previously. The school daycare for the girls was very expensive, and they had a lot of debt. They were living on those credit cards, the credit cards that Chris used once when she was in North Carolina to go to dinner with his mistress, and then he used it again that weekend, that fatal weekend before killing Shanann. And that may have sparked an argument. If she had the energy to get into an argument after a long trip, her flight got delayed. She got home at 2 a.m. and she was exhausted. And she had a migraine and she was not feeling well. Also, this whole story of Chris saying that they had sex, my speculation is that he may have said that because his mistress, even after all these months, NK, she's going to be sitting at the edge of the chair to hear what he has to say, every word he has to say. And this may have been something to get back at her, that he had sex with his wife, something he would not do when he was in North Carolina earlier on, would not touch her, would not come close near her. So the thought that she having a migraine, being so late, was seducing him, and with all these issues with trust, it just doesn't fit with me. Was she that desperate for this man that even at that late at night, being so tired, she was going to seduce him? Then somebody come up with this whole story that has no evidence from anywhere that I know of. Oh, it's almost like making up this whole story. I try to base my speculations on things that had been said. For instance, factual things. Her friend said that she had a migraine. Her friend said she was not feeling well. She was not doing well. Her blood sugars were low when they were on this trip. They were forcing her to eat. She was not eating because of the marital problems. She was not physically feeling well. So I'm basing what I'm saying on that. I don't know the evidence that somebody has all these stories that Shanann Watts, she would relax with sex. That would relax her. Where do you get that? So anyway, I have my theory that that might have been his reasons for throwing that story in there that didn't make any sense. And then what I like to throw in now is what I've been saying all along. I had this aha moment, and I could be right or I could be wrong. Interesting enough, I was right on a few things when I made a short video before we knew what Chris Watts had said. And I was right on a few things. But where was I? Okay. This thing about, okay, so she was very tired. And I know now what I wanted to get to. If a person, I listened to what Chris Watts is saying during that interview in prison. And he said, she was face down. And then she turned on her back to talk to me. And I was straddling her. Then she said that she was going to take the girls. And then something took a hold of me, and then I strangled her. And then he mentioned again, she was face down. She was face down. He mentioned it a couple times. I think you have to listen very closely to what he's saying, because in terms of the narcissism, the reverse narcissism, or whatever kind of narcissism, he seems very attached to that image of himself as the good guy. He seems to really want to hold on to that, giving that impression. He's not a good guy. We all know that. He's not. He may have seemed like a good guy all along. A good guy is not unfaithful. A good guy does not get a phone app to hide his affair. A good guy is not deceitful. A good guy doesn't lie to his wife. A good guy doesn't come forward and just tell his wife, I faltered, I got in an affair. And the good guy doesn't kill his family. And it's not a matter of judgment. I'm talking about this persona that he so wants to hold on to it. So he starts saying things, and then he goes back and kind of tries to take it away. So I think that he just doesn't want to say that it was premeditated. I think he doesn't want to say, I made the decision, I was downstairs, I made the decision, climbed up the stairs. She was either face down or sleeping on her side, like praying. Maybe not like this, but sometimes you're sleeping like this, semi-prone. Most people do not sleep on their back. Most people are either on their side, and there are people that like to sleep on their stomach. The baby was probably only about 4 inches and only weighed probably 2.5 ounces at 15 weeks. That's not a big belly. A person that is someone who sleeps on their stomach, that's not going to stop them from sleeping on their stomach. I used to sleep on my stomach, and there was no other way that I could sleep. And I had to teach myself to sleep on my side, because they told me that that wasn't a good thing to sleep on your stomach. So if she's sleeping like this or like this, and she's semi-prone, or even if she's on her stomach, and you know that when you're on your stomach, you're not completely face down, but you're somewhat face down. So the theory that I have is that he just made the decision here on something that he may have been thinking about for a little while. And he went up the stairs, straddled her. And mind you, if you're under the sheets themselves are going to clamp you down. So you're pinned by this man, this big man, because he was looking very strong. He was muscular. He is muscular, and he's a man. Usually women are smaller and not as strong as most men, and that is why men are more able to cause harm to women. So he said he straddled her, and either she had her wrists close together, he could have held her wrists, and with the other hand C-clamped her throat. She had finger marks on one side of her neck, and the hyoid wasn't broken. The way normally when people squeeze this way, the usual finding is that they break the hyoid bone there. So she had finger marks on one side of her neck, and the hyoid wasn't broken. So he didn't need as much as the strength to use both hands, and he was able to choke her. Either one hand holding her wrists or whatever else was happening. But the reason they may not have been any defense wounds on either one of them, either on Shanann or on Chris, is because he may have totally blindsided her. She was asleep. He came and tackled her the way a policeman sometimes tackle someone down to hold them down. Held her down, pinned her with the sheets and his own weight while he was straddling her. She couldn't move, and then he very possibly C-clamped her throat. And it only takes very short time before the person passes out, but to kill them, you have to keep hold for quite a few, 4 or 5 minutes is what I heard said. 4 or 5 minutes, you can still let go. And many men who have done domestic violence, that have choked women, choked their wives, often they let go. Eventually they let go. It's not because the women have been able to free themselves, or sometimes they have been able to free themselves out, but very often they let go. But in the case of domestic violence, eventually the statistics is eventually they carry out and kill these women. We don't know of any domestic violence in this family from Chris. He was always thought of as a nice guy, but you know that it starts out with very shady things in terms of hiding nude pictures of things that speak of character. And one more thing about whether there is environmental factors in sociopaths or people with antisocial personality disorders, and there is environmental factors with psychopaths. What comes to mind to me is Dahmer. Of course, I'm bringing up serial killers. When I say psychopath, I'm not talking about serial killers. I'm talking about people who can kill and go totally dandy about their day afterwards. They have no qualms, no remorse, no problems with what they've done. And that's what we see. That's what tells me about Chris Watts. He went and dumped his 2 children in these oil tanks called batteries. And then he hit his wife's corpse, and then he tried to blend the land and try to take away the marks, his footprints and so forth. And you can see how fine he is afterwards. Now, that's the other thing people are saying, well, we don't know if he's in shock. His mind was very much working. His mind was working, and even the next day, he had a whole night to think about turning himself in, if this had been a crime of passion. So yeah, the psychopathy that I'm talking about is also the indications that this one may have been planned. And I can do a whole video of why I think this was planned. I think I've explained it before, but there's something that hints to the fact that this may have been in his mind that weekend. Anyway, I could be mistaken about that. Okay, but still there's premeditation when you think about killing someone. If you're in rage, I'm going to kill this person, but even this way he speaks about his wife, whether he didn't feel like he could be himself, some things that might point to spousal abuse, but there was nothing really. He never said she beat him up, or any of the verbal things that she may have said that were not as egregious. They're not egregious. She'd say this is a POS. So he doesn't sound like he had that much against her, or that his life was that bad or that terrible. During those 5 or 6 weeks that Shanann was away, then he could be the bachelor. He could live the bachelor life. That's what his wife said. He's living the bachelor life, eating lobster and beer because of that $60 charge to the credit card. But it seems like he had no responsibilities. He didn't have to take care of the girls. He wasn't left with the girls. He could do whatever he wanted. So this brings me to what I was going to talk about is, and I'll come back to Dahmer and his mother, is that narcissism is regarded as stunted growth. Stunted growth, where people are not able to grow up to be what normal adults are. Normal adults can sacrifice themselves because they have now kids. They can take responsibility. They can be a little bit more selfless. They can take care of themselves well, but they also are able to be selfless. That's part of maturity. Selfless in terms for someone who has a greater need, like a child, or an elder person, or someone who's sick, and so forth. There is a stunted growth in narcissism, in that there is no full emotional development. And that happens with upbringing. If you don't have all your needs met emotionally, psychologically, even physically, and so forth, you're not able to develop fully. With psychopathy, it's believed that there could be some things in the development of the brain that takes away. You have that prefrontal cortex that can override the amygdala and override certain impulses and certain emotional triggers and so forth, and your brain can override it. And they say that prefrontal cortex activity on MRIs in people that have psychopathy, there are some changes in terms of the activity of the brain compared to regular people. And this is people that they've already determined that, perhaps via an inventory or via history or so forth, they have already determined that they probably have a certain degree of psychopathy. All of the psychopathy is not always bad, and all of the psychopaths don't always commit crimes. Not all psychopaths are serial killers. Not all psychopaths commit horrible crimes. And some of the traits as a psychopath is that lack of empathy, the lack of remorse for their actions, the certain amount of planning on the things that they do, planning them and doing them in cold blood. The description Chris Watts gives of how he kills his girls, sound very cold-blooded. He wants to say now that, he's haunted by Bella saying, "No daddy, no daddy." Maybe that's the one thing that somehow reaches somewhere in him. But even as she was saying, "No daddy," he still smothered her. Just the same psychopaths kill victims who are pleading for their lives. They just do it. So, about Dahmer, I'll bring it up. In terms of, excuse me, in terms of the environmental factors, Dahmer, if you listen to his mother, she's a mess. She's a mess. She left him when he was still young, or he was still a teenager, left him alone in the house, took off. There's all kinds of crazy things about this woman. And this is the mother of Dahmer. And Dahmer was a psychopath. He killed his victims. He planned them. He killed them. So you don't have to be a serial killer. And I know I'm beating the drum on here, but going back a little bit on this attachment that Chris Watts has, that is the puzzling thing about him, that he's like a rare combination between a vulnerable narcissism and psychopathy. And that he is so attached to that good kid, good guy image that he seems a little bit compelled to tell some of the truth, but then he takes it away because seems like he doesn't want to seem bad. So instead of fessing up to premeditation, he wants to say, oh, something was in control of me. I don't know why I couldn't let go. It was rage. I think there was rage because there was violence, and often with violence there is rage. So it's very peculiar about him, this thing about this combination between a vulnerable narcissist who wants to look like a good guy for others. I did say that story about the airplane that's going to crash. The narcissist would take all the credit if he saves the people, and will embellish and say, look at what a good guy I am. And the psychopath would steal all the jewelry and the money, jump off the aircraft with a parachute, probably the only parachute that's available, let the airplane crash, and take all the witnesses. Chris Watts seems like a guy that would do both. He would look like the good guy while he does something horrible. And that is what you see every time you listen to him. He looks like the poor guy, the good guy. And everybody's mind is blown. How can this nice man have done what he did? And nobody can make sense of it. It makes no sense. So yeah, he would look like the good guy while he does horrible things, cheating on his wife, lying, all these horrible things, and he still looks so nice. And they know how to pull on people's emotional strengths. That's the other thing that is a psychopathic trait, in my opinion. So I had a few notes. Person don't have to. Okay, so anyway, I think I was still talking about Chris West holding on to that nice guy image that he feels, he kept saying, I've never been in trouble. I didn't even know I had a traffic ticket. Don't people get stopped when they get a traffic ticket? Unless, was it a parking ticket that they're talking about? Never in trouble with the law. And he's depicted by everybody like the super nice guy. Then we find out, and people find out, even his friends, the neighbors, one of which worked with him, how they were like, oh my God, we let this guy into our house. We let him sleep under our roof. We let him in. That's the shock of thinking that this was a nice person, and obviously this was a very dangerous. And what makes him very dangerous is that convincing. You don't get so convinced of what he's saying, but you get convinced of that vulnerable, fragile person that seems like a good guy. And that was what I think was happening with everybody. Even when you listen to that interview in prison, you get all convinced again, even though a lot of things don't make sense. Oh, I'm straddling and I'm sitting on top of her and we're talking, we're conversing. And Graham Coder says, really? Being pregnant and you're sitting on top of her? That doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense because they weren't having a conversation. He was killing her. And he didn't want to say, oh, and again, on that whole same vein, the reason why he kept saying she's face down, and they asked him, they went, did you see her eyes going red? And he said, no. Oh, I noticed it afterwards. He was not seeing her eyes. He was not seeing her face. And he's not someone that apparently seems like he would confront her face on. He was doing things behind her back, and that's how he killed her, without facing her. She had her back to him. She was blindsided. She was in the most vulnerable way a person could be, which is in their sleep. That's the best way to kill someone, in their sleep, because you take them totally by surprise. She had no chance to even fight him off. There was no defense wounds because she didn't have a chance to fight for her life. So anyway, this was just one more video that I wanted to put out. I had recorded it previously when these things were more fresh in my mind. And there's a lot of things that are still in my mind. Things that have to do with Nicole Kissinger's involvement. There may be things, apparently for what I know, the law is that even if you tell someone to kill another person, even if your hands were not on them, but you tell someone to kill somebody, I think that, as far as I know, that's punishable by law. But you have to prove it. In terms of the profile that's coming up for me about Kissinger, and I guess I'll go ahead and add this now in the few more minutes that I have. The profile that I get, this is what I get. A person who gets what she wants. She may say, I want what Shanann has. I want that man. A person that is not stopped by the certain considerations. Well, I can't have this man because he's married and he has kids and he has a family. Person who gets what she wants. I wonder what that relationship is with her father. Remember, her father came. Was she spoiled? Her father came and protected her. Most parents might do that, but what age is she? And he's there to protect her the way a father protects a teenager. And he's saying, you're leading, and this leading. And so Chris Watts also talked about certain temper tantrums that, while Nicole knew that he's married and he has to go back to the house, reasonably his wife was upset because she's trying to call him and she can't reach him. And it is reasonable because he was with another woman, and her intuition may be saying that something was not right, something was out of the usual. So she has reason to be upset. But Kissinger getting very upset, and very interesting, Chris Watts said that he had to talk her out of the ledge talking about Kissinger a couple of times because she would get upset. So is this a person who gets what she wants? Does she have some other disorder? And the relationship with the father coming to protect her. And then she is wanting to erase all her text messages, asking friends to erase text messages, telling the police not to bother Jim. Did the police ever find this Jim and talk to him? It doesn't seem like he was ever interviewed. Everybody else, including that friend Charlotte, was interviewed. Back to Kissinger, her profile. She's early 30s, I think, either 30 or early 30s. She says that men that she has dated, they're all non-committal or that BS. And she is the one that initiated a pursuit of Chris Watts. And it's not just what Chris Watts is saying, but it's evidenced by that initial email. She initiated this. She tells Chris Watts that she wants something just like what he has with his wife and those little girls. At the same time, she starts this affair with this man, and then she has second thoughts. He's been there, he's done that. I will always be his second fiddle. The girls will always come first. And then she says, but it's still too soon to tell. What could change is the question I have. What would change? Once you have kids, unless, the kids are here, the wife is not going to go away. You could divorce someone, but you're still going to have a relationship with that someone through the kids. So why is she saying it's too soon to tell? What is she talking about? When she tells her friend Charlotte, I may always come second, but it's too soon to tell. I'm not trying to find the fifth wheel on the car or something that's not there, but is this a woman that has to have what she wants? And then things turned out really bad for a family. Anyway, I don't think it's over. We might know more. It may take years, who knows? Cases sometimes surprise you. But the picture that is coming forth is of a person that has wants things that she can't have. You can't have somebody else's husband. You shouldn't. In theory, you shouldn't. The person's taken. The person belongs to somebody, with someone else, with their family. She wants to have things that she shouldn't have. And so the question is this someone who's willful? She has a temper tantrum because he has to go back to his family. He had to talk her off the ledge. So the psychology of all these things, I think, help us because we deal with many different psychologists throughout the day, throughout our interactions, everywhere we go with different people, and we have to look also at ourselves when we get fooled. What causes us to get fooled? All right, almost 50 minutes. Thank you for listening. If you listen through all of it, please subscribe if you like to. I'm gonna make a video if you're interested. Let you know that I am going to make a video on Amanda Knox. I met her in person very briefly, and I followed her case very closely for a long, long time, studied it very closely. So probably the very next video, the next two videos I'm going to make is one wrapping up the entire case of Chris Watts, my whole theory in one video. And the second one is going to be one on Amanda Knox. I don't know which one will come first, but if you like anything at all, click like, subscribe, comment. I appreciate all the comments. You don't have to agree with me, but I do appreciate a certain amount of kindness, being civil, no trolling, no hate speech, not even towards other people commenting. I get rid of the comments that are not forthright, they're not correct, because I can. YouTube allows me to do that, and so I do. But I do appreciate the good comments. Not, like I said, not that they have to agree with me. Sometimes I stood corrected, and when it's done the right way, the normal way, yeah. Have a nice day.